In the heart of the Colorado mountains, nestled amidst towering pines and the whispering winds, stood a weathered log cabin that held generations of family secrets and stories. This cabin belonged to Oliver, a 30-something software developer with a heart burdened by the loss of his beloved grandfather, who had built the cabin decades before modern society encroached on its serene solitude. Every visit felt like stepping back in time, a retreat from the clamor of city life, and Oliver cherished the peace surrounding the property. It was a sanctuary where he could recharge away from the pressures of spreadsheets and deadlines. But tranquility was fleeting. The picturesque mountain views and unspoiled terrain attracted the attention of developers with grand ambitions. Before he knew it, the quiet serenity was pierced by the sounds of bulldozers and the construction of luxury homes dubbed Mountain Vista Estates. With it, they brought an HOA, an entity Oliver had only heard tales about in hushed tones. Their rigid rules and snooty bylaws were a mockery to the free spirit his grandfather had lived by. It was a summer afternoon, and Oliver, with dirt under his fingernails and sweat glistening on his brow, was busy pulling weeds from the front yard. The stillness of the air was disrupted when a sleek, black Mercedes pulled up. Out stepped a woman clad in designer hiking gear, perfectly manicured and utterly out of place amidst the rugged beauty of nature. She introduced herself as Karen Wellington, the president of the HOA. Her smile was friendly, but there was a predatory glint in her eye. "Lovely place you have here," she started, her tone overly saccharine. "We were wondering if you'd consider becoming part of our community and turning your lovely cabin into a community guest house." The way she said guest house felt like she was claiming ownership rather than making an offer. Oliver blinked in disbelief, shocked not only by the audacity of her request, but also by the implications. This cabin had been his family's for generations, a legacy fought for and preserved through blood, sweat, and tears. "I'm sorry, but this is my private property," he firmly replied. But Karen pressed on, her voice oozing condescension. "Our board believes that having an unmaintained property nearby is detrimental to our community. You really should consider joining our association." Gritting his teeth, Oliver fought to keep his cool. "My property is well maintained, and as I said, I'm not interested in joining your HOA." "Suit yourself," she said, her smile faltering just for a moment. "But you might want to reconsider. We can be very persuasive when it comes to maintaining property values." The threat lingered in the air as she turned on her heel, retreating to her vehicle, while Oliver stood frozen in disbelief at the audacity of it all. Inside, the quiet hum of the fridge seemed stifling as he mulled over the exchange. He knew that while he might have stood his ground today, this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The feud had begun, but little did he know that it would morph into a battle much larger than mere property rights. It would test his resolve, friendships, and ultimately, the sanctity of the cabin that meant the world to him. Days turned into weeks. As summer heat faded into autumn coolness, Oliver's mailbox seemed to overflow with a new kind of correspondence, letters from the HOA, filled with legal jargon and threatening undertones. They alleged that his quaint homestead had violated their precious community codes. This wasn't just a case of neighborly squabbles, it was a full-on war for his private patch of peace. Each letter brought a fresh wave of frustration. "They can't do this," he muttered under his breath, determined not to be intimidated. With each violation notice that he received, anger boiled in him, and the sanctuary that had once provided solace now felt like a target. Then, one chilly afternoon, a particularly vicious letter arrived, claiming that his property was detrimental to the aesthetic value of Mountain Vista Estates. Balancing his laptop on his knees, he sought legal advice from a friend, Sarah, a sharp real estate attorney who wasn't intimidated by a challenge. The flicker of hope ignited in Oliver when she assured him, "They have no legal standing. You have the upper hand, eh?" Thus began Oliver's journey toward reclaiming his peace, igniting a fire within him that would not only defend his inheritance, but also inspire those around him to stand up against entitlement and oppression. What followed would be a battle against an HOA, in which he would learn that solitude isn't just a place, it's also a fight worth fighting. And as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the cabin, Oliver sat at his wooden table, strength coursing through him. The legacy of his grandfather lived on, and he was ready to defend it. Little did he know, The first skirmish with the HOA would set in motion a whirlwind of events, leading him to unexpected alliances, fierce resistance, and ultimately, a deeper understanding of his own principles. In a world where the lines between private and public often blurred, it was time to draw his own and fight for what mattered most. In a world where the lines between private and public often blurred, it was time to draw his own and fight for what mattered most. Oliver felt the resolve solidifying within him, pushing aside the lingering doubts that whirled like autumn leaves in the icy breeze. He couldn't let this HOA encroach upon his sanctuary, his grandfather's legacy and his own haven among the mountains. With renewed determination, he sat at his kitchen table, action plan forming in his mind. Sarah, his lawyer friend, had agreed to meet the next day at the cabin. "We'll map out a strategy," she had assured him over the phone. The thought of her sharp mind and her unwavering support brought him comfort. Preparing to stand his ground against the HOA was daunting, but Oliver knew he needed to gather evidence, documents, photographs of his well-kept property, anything that showcased his commitment to maintaining the cabin. That night, he worked feverishly, reviewing the letters from Karen and the HOA. Each one was more ludicrous than the last, invoking rules that, in his mind, seemed to stretch the limits of legality. But with every notice, he felt the fire of indignation burning hotter. It was not just about property lines. It was about respect for the land, respect for the heritage his family had preserved for decades, and respect for his rights as a property owner. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, as if the world itself was bracing for the battle ahead. Sarah arrived early, her face set in a determined expression. "Let's lay everything out," she urged, walking with him around the property. They paused several times as Oliver explained the history of the cabin, the memories it housed, the family gatherings, the stories his grandfather had woven into the very woodwork. "I can feel the love here, Oliver," Sarah said, pausing to take in the soaring trees and the distant mountain peaks. "This is worth fighting for. Now, let's start gathering all the material we need. We can show them that they don't have the authority to claim this land." With her guidance, they began compiling a dossier filled with photographs of the cabin, the manicured yard, and scattered family memorabilia that proved the property's long-standing legacy. Together, they crafted a letter that outlined his intentions to fight back, asserting his rights with a confidence that had been absent just a week before. Midway through their preparations, as they reviewed the last few documents, Oliver's phone buzzed with an unfamiliar ringtone. It was a text from Karen, a tone of arrogance seeping through her words. "We've noticed your property still doesn't comply with HOA standards. Additional fines may follow if you do not address this," she threatened, as if he were a child given an ultimatum. Oliver's blood boiled at the thought of her audacity. "They think they can just bully me. Let's see how they like a taste of their own medicine," he replied, a smirk creeping across his face. Days turned into a whirlwind of preparations, with Sarah and Oliver strategizing every angle. They decided on a multi-pronged attack: respond to all HOA notices with firm legal rebuttals, gather support from neighbors who shared his concerns, and perhaps even seek local media coverage to expose their overreach. Tapping into community connections felt like the right course. He wouldn't be fighting this battle alone. The following weekend, he casually mentioned his situation to Tom, a friendly face he had met among the few reasonable neighbors from Mountain Vista Estates. Tom raised an eyebrow, seeming surprised. "You know, a lot of folks around here are frustrated with the old HOA board's treatment of property owners like you. They are hungry for change, especially after hearing the rumors about what happened to your cabin," he said, leaning in. "Maybe you can rally some support." That idea struck a chord. Oliver could feel the wheels in his mind starting to turn. "You might be on to something there," he said, excitement bubbling within him. "What if I organized a meeting? It could be an opportunity for everyone to voice their issues with the HOA and maybe even get results." Tom clapped him on the shoulder, a grin spreading across his face. "Let's do it. We can gather some people at the local diner. Folks love to talk over coffee, especially when it comes to HOA drama." Invigorated, Oliver created a flyer, emphasizing the gathering's purpose: to unite against the overreach of the HOA. He could feel the stow of hope fueling his efforts. Perhaps he wasn't just fighting for his cabin, he was igniting a movement that could spark change for many. As the word spread, Curiosity grew, and responses poured in. The day of the meeting arrived, and Oliver found himself standing in front of a small crowd of locals at the diner. He shared his story, detailing the encounters with the HOA, the harassment, and the infringing nature of their demands. Heads nodded as he spoke, voices murmuring in agreement. The tension in the room shifted into a palpable energy, a shared sense of unity against the injustice. Tom leaned in closer, whispering excitedly, "You're really bringing people together. This is just the beginning." The conversation shifted naturally from Oliver's predicament to the broader issues affecting the community. Residents unburdened themselves of their own grievances, the air thick with shared frustrations. They began to envision a better version of their neighborhood, one where neighbors respected each other's property rights instead of overstepping boundaries. "Let's start a petition," someone finally suggested, and the crowd rallied around the idea. Together, they crafted a document outlining their demand for more transparency and respect from the HOA, a pledge to uphold the rights of all residents. By the night's end, Oliver felt a surge of pride. He had taken a step that would ripple through his community, but he also felt the weight of responsibility. The fight against the HOA wasn't just his battle anymore. It had transformed into a mission for everyone who felt wronged. As he left the diner, the moon bright in the star-studded sky, Oliver knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. But he felt exhilarated, buoyed by the support of those around him who believed in the cause. The fight for his grandfather's cabin was beginning in earnest, and he was ready to face whatever twists and turns lay ahead on this journey to reclaim their home and their rights. As he left the diner, the moon bright in the star-studded sky, Oliver knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. But he felt exhilarated, buoyed by the support of those around him who believed in the cause. The fight for his grandfather's cabin was beginning in earnest, and he was ready to face whatever twists and turns lay ahead on this journey to reclaim their home and their rights. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Word spread quickly through the community, and soon residents were reaching out to Oliver, eager to join the movement. They shared stories of their own encounters with the HOA, recounting moments of frustration and confusion as they navigated ambiguities in their rules and regulations. Some had felt powerless against penalties for minor infractions, while others expressed how the HOA had stifled the very spirit of community they had hoped to cultivate. Encouraged by their enthusiasm, Oliver organized a follow-up meeting at his cabin. As they gathered in the rustic living room, the scent of pine and the warmth of the fireplace enveloped them. Oliver began the meeting by sharing his vision of a neighborhood where everyone felt respected, where community members could come together without fear of overreach or intimidation. Tom chimed in, recounting his own experiences with the former HOA board. "There was a time when I felt I had to tiptoe around my own garden because of their rules," he said, eliciting a chorus of sympathetic murmurs. "If a flower bloomed outside what they deemed acceptable, I would dread receiving a violation notice." Laughter rippled through the room, lightening the tense air. From there, ideas blossomed. They discussed how to collectively challenge the HOA's authority, how to navigate local laws, and how each member could strengthen their position by documenting their experiences. Sarah joined them too, providing insight into the legal framework they could leverage. "Knowledge is power," she emphasized. "If we can band together, we can form a coalition that shows the new HOA board we mean business." As topics unfolded, Oliver felt a growing sense of camaraderie among the neighbors. They were no longer isolated individuals fighting personal battles. They were a united front. He passed around a petition, and as signatures flowed in, an undeniable energy filled the space. With each name, he could sense the momentum building, reminding him that they were standing together against intimidation. But there was still a cloud of uncertainty looming. The HOA would undoubtedly retaliate, and he couldn't imagine what lengths they might go to silence their dissent. Fearful of Karen Wellington's next step, he felt a knot of tension in his gut. She was relentless, and even with the support of the community, he worried about how far she would push. The following week, as a meeting of the HOA was scheduled, Oliver decided to attend, ready to present the petition. He felt it was important to confront them directly, to assert his presence as a member of the community who would not be easily swayed or intimidated. As he sat in the crowded conference room of the Mountain Vista Estates Community Center, Oliver's heart raced. HOA members droned on about landscaping guidelines and absurdly minor infractions, but he couldn't help but zone out, focusing instead on building the courage to speak up. His fellow residents filled the back of the room, their presence like a shield of support. When the time came, Oliver stood, his voice ringing through the tense room. "I'm here tonight not only for myself but for every resident who believes our rights as homeowners should not be trampled upon," he began, catching Karen's eye as he spoke. "I spoke to many of you," he continued, gesturing toward the back where those who had supported him were gathered. "We've come together as a community to resist the overreach of the HOA. We demand transparency and respect in how our properties are governed. We've collected the signatures of over 50 residents who believe in a more balanced and fair approach to community living." A murmur swept through the audience, mixed with scattered applause. Karen's expression shifted, her confident facade cracking just slightly. "This is unacceptable," she declared, standing up abruptly. "This is private property governed by an established HOA, and we take our responsibilities seriously. We can't let a small number of dissenters jeopardize our values." Oliver pressed on, undeterred. "By enforcing arbitrary rules, you're isolating your neighbors. You're fostering resentment instead of community. We're not here to fight, we want to collaborate. Let's work together to create a neighborhood that reflects the wishes of everyone involved." The room buzzed with tension as Karen exchanged hurried whispers with the other board members. There was no backing down now. Oliver felt the weight of the moment urging him forward. "Together, we will stand against intimidation. My hope is that we can engage in meaningful dialogue rather than punishment. That's what a community should strive for." Silence enveloped the room as he concluded, a moment of breath held, waiting for Karen's response. But as Oliver's gaze met his, he could see her calculating, the wheels in her mind turning. With a flick of the wrist, she waved to her board members dismissively. "We will consider your petition," she said begrudgingly, "but understand that rules are rules. Any violations will be dealt with, regardless of your sentiments." Disappointment settled over him like a shroud, but Oliver refused to let the setback dampen his spirit. "We will hold you to that," he replied, feeling a spark of determination igniting within him once more. After the meeting, supporters flocked to Oliver, their faces glowing with pride. "You did it, man." Tom beamed, clapping him on the back. "You stood up to her." The community had shown resilience, and in that moment, Oliver realized that while the battle against the HOA had just begun, he'd garnered support that filled him with unwavering hope. Even as shadows loomed on the horizon, he felt emboldened knowing he was not standing alone. Together, they would face whatever the HOA would throw at them next, and in that fight, the spirit of community would shine brighter than any threatening notice that dared to breach their peace. Together, they would face whatever the HOA would throw at them next, and in that fight, the spirit of community would shine brighter than any threatening notice that dared to breach their peace. The days that followed were tense as Oliver and his neighbors prepared for the inevitable backlash from the HOA. Whispers circulated that the board was strategizing ways to clamp down on their growing discontent, and the air seemed thick with uncertainty. But instead of retreating into fear, the community emerged with a new sense of unity and determination. Neighborhood watch meetings turned into planning sessions, and soon enough, they began formulating ideas that would put pressure back on the HOA. Word spread about Oliver's initiative, attracting more residents eager to voice their shared frustrations. The petition, which had started with a small group, grew, capturing the signatures of over 100 residents. Each name represented a commitment to standing up against arbitrary regulations, a promise to create a neighborhood that values friendship over fines. Then came the fateful day. Oliver received a letter from the HOA announcing an open meeting to discuss the concerns raised by the petition. It felt like a turning point. Perhaps they were finally willing to engage in dialogue. As the date approached, Oliver felt a flutter of nerves combined with excitement. On the evening of the meeting, Oliver and a dozen neighbors arrived armed with facts, stories, and a unified spirit. This time, the atmosphere was palpable with anticipation. They had prepared statements, each one strong and heartfelt, reflecting the sentiment of countless homeowners whose lives had been disrupted by petty rules and fines. As he entered the room, Oliver felt the weight of his grandfather's legacy resting on his shoulders. He stood at the front, flanked by supporters, ready to present a vision of a neighborhood built on respect, collaboration, and mutual support. "We aren't here to confront, but to invite cooperation," he began, feeling the energy of the room behind him. "Our community can thrive when each of us is heard." Then, as statements were presented one after another, tales of heartbreak mingled with hope. Mary, a longtime resident, shared her story of receiving a fine for her beloved garden, a space she had painstakingly tended to for over a decade. "It feels like you're punishing us for caring," she said, her voice breaking. "We want to beautify our neighborhood, not be at odds with its governing bodies." A ripple of agreement surged through the crowd, and Oliver knew they were reaching a turning point. As the evening wore on, it became clear that the HOA board, led by Karen, was becoming increasingly uneasy. The residents' stories were resonating, and the weight of community spirit began to seep into the cracks of their once unyielding demeanor. When it was finally Karen's turn to respond, her voice wavered slightly, betraying her outer confidence. "We've implemented these rules for a reason," she began, but the murmurs of dissent began to rise. "They are in place to ensure property values." "Property values aren't worth losing friendships over," a voice from the back countered, and the room erupted with supportive claps, punctuated by laughter at the very idea that keeping a neighborhood vibrant and happy could be equated to maintaining a rigid set of guidelines. As the night drew to a close, Oliver took a deep breath, feeling the weight of anticipation hanging in the air. "We stand ready to work with you," he said firmly. "Let's establish a dialogue moving forward. We can create a council comprised of residents and board members to find common ground. Collaboration is better than confrontation." His proposal hung in the air, and for a moment, silence descended, an unusual stillness. Then, in an uncharacteristically gracious gesture, Karen answered, "Let's take this into consideration. We're willing to look into forming a committee to facilitate communication. But know this, rules will always be enforced to protect the integrity of the neighborhood." Though her answer wasn't a complete victory, it was a glimmer of progress. As the meeting adjourned, the air was electric with camaraderie. Residents embraced, laughter bubbled up, stories shared, plans hatched for local events that would bring them closer together beyond challenges. Over the next few weeks, the committee began to form. It was composed of homeowners from various backgrounds and experiences intertwined with Oliver and Sarah's guidance. They initiated open meetings where concerns could be voiced freely, paving the way for understanding that had long been absent. Each success, no matter how small, was a testament to the power of community when collectively harnessed. As they brought structure to the committee, Oliver found himself stepping into a leadership role he hadn't anticipated. He felt his grandfather's spirit guiding him, encouraging him to fight for the same ethos of belonging and home that had shaped their family's history. He learned to channel his passion into constructive dialogues, balancing assertiveness with empathy. Months passed, and as they established means of transparency, the HOA began to soften. Many outdated regulations were revised, and each session fostered dialogue that replaced conflict with collaboration. Oliver watched as neighbors who had previously felt isolated began to form friendships, exchanging ideas and creating projects that bolstered their little corner of the world, a community garden, book exchanges, and even a seasonal gathering to celebrate their shared victories. Then, one fateful autumn evening, Oliver strolled down the street, the crisp air warm with laughter and the vibrant hues of fallen leaves, feeling a serene satisfaction. He stopped by his grandfather's cabin, taking a moment to reflect on how far they had come, not just in fighting against the HOA, but in cultivating a strong sense of togetherness that would resonate for years to come. As he stood on the porch, looking out over the vibrant view of the mountains, he couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of hope. His battles had forged bonds, and what had once been a struggle had transformed into a movement that would ripple through future generations. Oliver smiled to himself, grateful for the challenges that had brought forth such strength and unity. This was home, not just a cabin, but the hearty spirit of community flourishing around him. In this beautiful, intertwined tapestry of lives, He knew that together, they could face whatever the future held. The fight was over, but their journey had only just begun, and it was filled with promise.